Can everyone hear me okay this afternoon? Great, I see all the head nods. I'd like to echo Vince's thanks to each of you joining our call this afternoon. I have to say, seeing all of your faces, I've never had a Zoom meeting that felt so much like a family reunion. I can't begin to tell you how great it is to see all of you. Before I get into our current and our future status of decision making, it's really important for you to know the experiences that have shaped and influenced our current decisions. So with your grace, I'm going to go back a bit and give you some of the behind the scenes of our shutdown. On March 15th, the day before we suspended volunteer activity, Alicia and I were at Chapel by the Sea Church, and we were celebrating their 40 years of volunteering with Habichat. At that time, the congregation, several members, implored us to not shut down our volunteer activity. So I can't begin to tell you how the weight of that decision felt just incredibly heavy on that day, especially since March is our busiest volunteer activity month of the year. However, the week prior, we had put out a communication to all of our volunteers, and we had asked individuals with underlying health conditions or those who were deemed to be in that CDC vulnerable populations category to please opt out of volunteering. So how do you think that went? So basically, no surprise to any of you that folks continued to show up. Even people who were suffering from things like cancer and COPD and people who had extremely ill family members at home. And it reinforced to us the selflessness, truly, that is what a Habichat volunteer is. But at that time, we had to ask ourselves, how would we feel if something happened to one of the people that we care so deeply about, and we could have done something to prevent it? So we moved to close the work sites at that week. Now, the stay-at-home order came very shortly after. And as you probably know, as an essential business, we were able to keep home building those operations going because we used our restore and our construction staff. And as soon as we started to shut down, of course, the first thing we did is start to figure out how we can then reopen. And as soon as the stay-at-home orders were lifted, we opened all facets of our organization. But of course, that was just to staff only. Then we started to bring back our future homeowners so that they could do their sweat equity hours. Sadly, even with all of our safety precautions in place, in our first phase of reopening, we had staff cases and direct exposures that happened almost daily. At one point, we had 14 staff and 2 Habichat families under quarantine. We actually had to create mechanisms and spreadsheets just to monitor people who were going for testing and their symptoms and their quarantining. And at that time, we had 19 closings on the line. And at that point, we were considering shutting down for a second time because we just couldn't keep our staff healthy. You guys don't know this, but we actually had 2 internal dates to bring back volunteers. So twice we were preparing to do so, and we had to cancel because we couldn't sustainably support volunteer activity. Through all of this, we came to the realization that we weren't setting dates to bring back volunteers because the world's a safer place than when we shut down. The same circumstances that caused us to close in the first place, they were still present, and in truth, they were even greater. So it was these experiences that caused us to depart from a 40-year volunteer-based business model for restores and work sites. And in truth, this model is the only one we've ever known. So for restores, I think it's a bit more obvious why we haven't been able to bring back volunteers. It's our least controlled environment. It requires a level of consistent daily management to keep our staff safe, and introducing volunteers into that environment would diminish our safety protocols right now, because our number one objective is to keep our stores open and our staff safe. For our work sites, it's a bit more complicated. We began with the understanding that we really need to get homes started. It's the reason for our existence, and our families are counting on us. But wall raisings are simply not compatible for social distancing. And in order to utilize volunteers in the winter months with projects where folks can socially distance, we needed to raise walls now on schedule so that our permits won't expire. So for our overall decision-making, we have been taking into account our experiences, our needs, the safety of the people that we truly care about. But then from a purely business and risk perspective, I also have to look at liability. Our insurance, which covers every volunteer who walks onto any Habichat property, will actually not cover any illness related to COVID. That means that if someone became ill with COVID and is hospitalized, Habichat is actually on the hook for the expenses that their insurance won't cover. So that leads to the question, well, why not use waivers? Which is a great question, which we asked ourselves because we thought the same. But we came to learn that the world of COVID is fraught with litigation. In this current climate, our corporate attorney has recommended us not to go this route. And even though we wish it were different, we just hope and we can acknowledge that this is something that may evolve in the future. But truthfully, waiver or not, it doesn't save our most valued asset, which is our volunteers. There is just no simple answer for when we can resume volunteer activity. When COVID cases in our area just are consistently low and low enough that we can safely reintroduce volunteers, we will then align those volunteers with the tasks that can be performed safely. And we know that this is going to happen one step at a time. I want everyone to know that we are not subcontracting out full homes. Everything we do is being done in phases. I can speculate at this time that when we start to reintroduce volunteers, we will do so in small groups. But even this is difficult because we'll have to prioritize. Because initially we won't be able to open up our work sites like we have in the past to everyone and be able to bring everyone in. And just as an aside, my friends, for those of you who know that I have a weakness for volunteers and have asked me to sneak you onto the work site, I am staying strong with that. So don't continue to ask. But also, we have to place a priority on our families, because they have to own a piece of this mission, which means that completing their sweat equity hours is vital to who we are. And this year, I think you know this, we're going to be serving 55 families who need to do 300 hours each, which is a total of 16,500 hours. So this is going to be challenging for a while. And I've also been asked, how are we going to prioritize? Last week, we held a funeral here at our office for a man named Harold, who volunteered every week from the age of 65 to 94. A gentleman who was 44 years old attended the funeral, and he was able to volunteer alongside Harold at the age of 16. And it changed the trajectory of his life. Habichat has always offered longtime volunteers like Harold the chance to lead projects somewhat independently. But just as important is it offers youth in many cases their first opportunity to be selfless and to serve. Our work sites also offer our devout faith communities a chance to put their love and faith into action, but just as important, and what I've witnessed firsthand recently, is those who have doubted their faith, they find acceptance for the first time, perhaps on our work sites. It's a place for our retired populations to stay healthy and active, a place for people to see the tangible representations of their giving, and it's a place for our corporate groups to exercise their social responsibility. So even though our first steps will most likely include limited spaces for our most seasoned volunteers, I also have to acknowledge the larger benefits of the community. So what's next, and how can you all be a part of it and help? So I would ask that you plug others into this discussion and help us really think about how we can bring people into our mission, perhaps without right now traditional volunteerism. You know, this isn't going to be our last communication, and these types of issues, they are complex. But I would like everyone to stay engaged, because even though you're not right now perhaps experiencing our work firsthand, our vital work really does continue. The infrastructure for phase 1 of Heritage Heights is wrapping up. I'd encourage you to grab a friend and drive through that neighborhood. And like Vince said, our future parcels are underway for development. We continue to counsel families, move them along the continuum to get them buyer ready, and whether that means purchasing a Habichat home or stabilizing their finances so they can apply for a traditional loan. We're helping so many families right now. We've even been contracted through the city of Cape Coral to disperse their mortgage and rental assistance for low-income families impacted by COVID. Right now, we're processing 236 applications for Cape families through that program. So from our time today, I want each of you to know that our decision-making surrounding volunteer engagement is incredibly considered. It's a phased approach, and we're taking into account the alignment of our projects as it compares to our current circumstances, but also while prioritizing our families. And that's really where we are today.